Welcome everyone to our Google Hangout, Historical Empathy with Archival Documents. This is the fourth Google Hangout in our sessions. We are here with Sierra Green from the Heinz History Center. So Sierra, want to say hello to everyone?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being with me here today. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you all.
Excellent. And so, like I mentioned, this is the fourth Hangout within the Smithsonian Learning Lab series. We have done Hangouts on using artifacts in the Smithsonian Learning Lab, using portraits, using photographs. And today we're going to really dive into archival documents. But before we get started, a few logistics and housekeeping. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Smithsonian Learning Lab, it's available at learninglab.si.edu. And there you will find over 2 million resources. These are videos, digitized collections from all of the museums, as well as magazine articles, all sorts of rich primary and secondary sources, as well as over 2,000 Learning Lab collections. And these are aggregations, groupings of resources that are available for teachers and students to use. And that's at learninglab.si.edu. Today, we should also give special thanks to the Grable Foundation of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for their support of this session. These are actually 4 of the teachers that are participating in a workshop series that's been going on for the past year. And they are actually in the archives where Sierra works, looking at photographs and analyzing them. So it's nice to have some of our Pittsburgh teachers with us today as well. And then just moving on to how to ask questions. We want this to be an interactive chat for you, so feel free to ask questions. Use the chat box on the right-hand side of the video player. There you can ask questions of Sierra. I'll serve as kind of the voice of the audience, and so I'll interject throughout the conversation. If there are questions related to archives or to some of the specific documents that she's highlighting today, please feel free to join in the chat. I know your colleagues who are also participating would appreciate to hear your questions as well, because they probably have some of the same questions. All right, and without further ado, I'd love to have Sierra take it away. So I'm going to switch over to her, and there you go.
Great. Well, thank you all so much once again for taking the time to spend time with me today. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to really talk with you about how to engage with and really perceive of how to find archival documents within archival collections, both within the Learning Lab and then beyond. So really the point of discussion and the way that I want to kind of structure this presentation is thinking through how it is that you conceptualize and the frame of mind that you bring to searching within archival collections and the Learning Lab generally. I really want for all of us today to think about how it is that we bring people to the fore, just generally, and thinking about the people who are on the ground and experiencing the moments and the topics and the themes that relate to, or the topics and then the themes that you want your students to connect with. I really think that there's great potential if you embrace this mindset to seek out and find the lesser known ground level voices of these everyday people in order to kind of stimulate the notion of historical empathy and that perspective with your students generally. And I think that there's real power in this. So before I dive into it too much, I'd like to take a moment and just go over the outline and get a sense of where we're headed today with this presentation. And then from there, we'll dive into the content. And so first, we're going to look at really the archival perspective and in reflecting and thinking through the content for this presentation. I just kept being drawn back to my soul and that of my soul as an archivist. And I think there are some benefits to thinking about and conceptualizing of archival collections from that vantage point, especially as it relates to finding collections that are well suited to stimulating historical empathy within students generally. So we're going to again kind of embrace that archival perspective for a little bit and introduce you to that archival perspective. From there, then we're going to just take a moment and define what it is that we mean by archival collections. And again, from that people first mindset and elevating the humanity of the people that created these collections and left behind these incredible pieces of evidence for us to analyze and explore and engage with. And then from there, we're actually going to look at a sampling of archival voices that we have within our collections. So all of these, of course, being here at the Heinz History Center, relate to Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania generally. But as you can see, they all tie to larger themes within our region and our nation's history that I think, again, there are other collections that lie in other repositories, and of course within the Learning Lab that relate to these topics as well. And I'm hopeful that each and every one of these examples will, again, stimulate your thinking as far as how different collections can provide different perspectives on larger themes in history. And again, being the perspective of everyday people who were on the ground in these moments in time, hopefully they'll be relatable to the students and evoke the historical empathy, and again, provide them an opportunity to engage with these stories and really critically think through them. And then finally, I don't want to seem as if I've kind of pulled these collections from a void. So we're really going to take some time to think about how it is that we can deploy particular strategies, and hopefully how you all can deploy these strategies to seek out and find some of these voices and perspectives within the Learning Lab and then beyond. Okay, so we are going to dive in then to taking a look at the archival perspective and archival documents as a gateway to historical empathy. So over the past few years, working as an archivist at the Heinz History Center, I really had the pleasure and the honor to work with a number of researchers of all kinds. So we're talking curators, genealogists, students, members of our education team, of our communications team. And I really, in reflecting on these interactions, I think there's just this beautiful collaborative space that you find as an archivist working with people coming from different perspectives. And observing people engage with our collections, both within the digital realm as well as within the physical realm, has really given me multiple moments to pause and reflect and really think through how it is that different people coming from different own personal or professional vantage points kind of try to cut through and seek out and find collections that relate to their topics of interest. This presentation today is really a reflection of how I've thought through those interactions. And again, it's kind of a way to approach how it is that you perceive of archival collections as you're attempting to find resources that relate to topics that you're interested in, and again, those that you hope will be engaging to students. And so I thought it might be helpful to kind of talk through a little bit the nature of the work of the archivist and the perspective that he or she often has in delving into these collections. And again, to drive home this notion that archival documents and any other archival materials that live within collections really are the evidence that everyday people left behind. And I think it's really important to keep that connection really strong. And so, when an archivist is working with a collection, it doesn't come prepackaged with subject terms and larger themes already associated with it. In some instances, it's quite a bit to wade through, but it's an incredible opportunity that really only the archivist gets to delve into this collection of original documents and primary source materials and really convene with the voices of the people who either created or collected these items themselves. And so really, I often talk about it, and I firmly believe this, it's really a spiritual experience. Taking that time to really dive into the original materials that someone left behind. It really is what remains of their voice, and being able to spend time rehousing these materials and getting to know them. It's during that process that the subject terms and the keywords kind of rise to the surface. But it's the collection itself that really speaks to the archivist and presents these larger topics and themes. And so, in a way, it's almost the reverse of what a researcher's experience and engagement with our collections are. We have so many different individual people and organizations and corporations and businesses represented in our collections. We don't necessarily expect our researchers to know each and every single family name and individual person and individual business and organization that we have within our collections. And so it it really is truly essential that we take the time to associate these original materials with the larger subject terms and themes that you often deploy in order to find these caches of great primary source materials. But all the same, I really think that there's a great opportunity in thinking about the pursuit of primary sources from the perspective of identifying really the people who were on the ground that experienced and were a part of that moment in time, whose experience relates to the themes and the topics that you're interested in generally. And so I have on the slide, this notion that it's really important to keep the relationship between the documents themselves and the people who created them closely linked together. This bond is really sacred for us archivists and also curators who work with museum collections. And again, I think, it's a really interesting frame of mind and a mindset, from which you can approach huge caches of primary source material and thinking about how to find those really great ground level perspectives from which to delve into a larger theme or topic in history. So from here, what I want to do before we delve into some specific examples that, again, I hope will really drive home this notion, of the power of delving into these everyday glimpses into larger themes and topics in history. I'm going to take a moment and just define what it is that archival collections are, again, from this vantage point. So what we identify the archival collections are is really the lasting, often personal evidence of persons, families, organizations, companies, and in some instances, government. Really, again, when you think about these primary source materials, I think it's important to keep it at the forefront, this notion of this was really what remains of their individual voice. And, today's talk there, it's really intentional that we went with archival documents rather than just archival collections more broadly, because when engaging with a variety of primary source material, you all are very much so aware in all of your navigation of the Learning Lab that there are many more visually intriguing facets of archival collections and also museum collections than archival documents. They often aren't the ones that kind of jump out to you as you're navigating the beautiful interface of the Learning Lab. But it's my argument, and again, coming from my vantage point as an archivist, that often written documents or reports, but really records, these written forms are perhaps among the more authoritative and reflective vessels of people's voices that you can find, certainly within the Learning Lab and within archival repositories more broadly. And so, beyond, thinking through, what we want to perceive of as far as these archival collections, we want to make sure to make a point that certainly they are unique and irreplaceable, and so that's what makes them distinct from library collections, published materials generally, and they are also a mosaic. So oftentimes when we receive archival documents into our collections, they are made up of so much more than one individual item. And so it is, we believe as a profession that it is the value is in the aggregate too of these documents and how each and every one represents a piece of the voice of the person or the organization or the family that created these materials and then deposited them within an archives. But again, we're not just talking about the old documents themselves or the old materials or the materials that live within a collection that serve as great primary sources. We want to make sure to maintain that connection between the people who created these materials and really the lived experiences that they persevered through and then the evidence of that lived experience that they deposited on paper and then donated to us.
Yes, Sierra, when you're talking about this too, it also makes me think of the people who thought to keep some of these records as well. So it's not the archivists who are receiving them or the people that these experiences, but also some of these that have kind of stood the test of time and really tell a personal story, but kind of on this much larger scale of specific events that might have happened kind of at the national level or maybe even at the local level too. But
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point. It's something that oftentimes we're so focused on caring for what did survive and what was donated to us that, I think it is important simultaneously to make as a point of emphasis the fact that these materials do exist, that they did survive. And perhaps most importantly, at least, in the case of a good number of archives, that someone thought enough to care for them and to perhaps make someone aware so that archival repositories could pursue bringing them into the collection and preserving them as a long-standing voice and a reflection of a theme within regional or national history that is certainly of research interest.
Yeah, and I see here on the slide, it's part of the Wykers family collection, is that right?
Oh, actually, the one that is featured in our archival collections defined. So this is actually the petition by Caroline Mann-Hannon, and it's one of the stories that I'll be sharing. Actually, I believe it's the last story that I'll be sharing. It's a formal petition that she submitted before the Allegheny County courts. So perhaps it's a little bit of a teaser there. So thank you very much for that, Ashley. And a great, incredible glimpse into the voice of a woman in the mid-19th century. So
great.
Yep. Okay. All right. So again, as we kind of just teased, we're going to delve into some individual collections that I hope, again, are reflective of the power of these ground level perspectives on history and particularly some, I think, evocative facets of themes in history generally as well. So the first that we're going to take a look at is a collection that relates really powerfully and really poignantly to disability history, particularly within our region. But also, it's something that in my work with this collection and also with the community who's very invested in telling the story of Western Pennsylvania's place in disability advocacy history, that there's quite an amount of significance in the work that this particular grassroots organization undertook to advocate for the rights of people with intellectual disabilities here in our region. And so I'm really excited to share this with all of you, and I think it is reflective of really embracing, perhaps these lesser known ground level voices who are really on the front lines of history. So within these slides, generally, I'm going to just take a moment, kind of contextualize the collections themselves, give a little bit of a background and a history. I certainly don't expect, being lesser known, I certainly don't expect all of you to be familiar with these narrative or with the larger historical context within which these collections fit. But then, of course, I will always make as a point of emphasis, highlighting the collections themselves and particularly certain primary source materials. And I do want to state at this point, and probably will reiterate throughout the course of the presentation, that a number of these primary source materials have been uploaded to the Learning Lab in a collection that relates to, or that will be linked to this Hangout, and you'll be able to access those and dive into them deeper. So should you be inclined. So. But now to Bob Nelkin and the ACC Park. So this organization was a grassroots organization made up of primarily the parent advocates of those with intellectual disability. So the organization itself was founded in the early 1950s, but really what we see most reflected within the collection itself is the work that this chapter undertook to investigate reports, or to really act on reports that they were receiving that the human rights of those with intellectual disabilities were being violated within state-run care facilities throughout Western Pennsylvania. So how this organization chose to react to these informal reports, really they deployed an incredible grassroots strategy of forming visitation teams who, once they were informed with these informal reports that were coming in from the parents of those with intellectual disabilities who had children who were living within these state-run care facilities, and then also those who were actually working as residential care workers at these facilities. Once they felt that they were informed from these informal reports, they decided to form a visitation team that would make both announced and unannounced visits to these state-run care facilities throughout the 1960s and 1970s. And in particular, in in making these visits, the folks, the incredible parent advocates primarily that made up these teams, paid particular attention to the residents' living conditions, so really their state of life, their quality of life, information about how much staff were at these state-run care facilities, the sanitary conditions of those people that lived at these state-run care facilities, and also the disciplinary practices that were employed at the time at these facilities, and then also treatment strategies as well. And so while making these unannounced and announced site visits, the visitation teams took great care to document their observations. And so again, this is reflected very, very powerfully within the collections. And what they found was actually quite troubling. So primarily they found a gross overpopulation with those that were living at the state-run care facilities. They also found that these facilities were chronically understaffed. And as a result, there was a real general lack of programming, and also the sanitary conditions were in some instances absolutely deplorable. And then beyond that, and perhaps most troublingly, they found evidence of the use of restraints and cattle prods and cages, and straitjackets, and a number of these measures, of course, violating the human rights of those people with intellectual disabilities, these Western Pennsylvania residents who were passing their lives at these state-run care facilities. And so, as you can imagine, this organization was faced with the challenge and the opportunity to really think about how to intentionally go about distributing the information, their findings during these visits. And so what they did was they deployed the strategy of reaching out to members of the local media, local legislators, as well as the Secretary of Public Welfare, in order to report these human rights violations and to affect positive change. And if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, Ashley, I'd like to read. So this is an example of a report that was made by this visitation team in January of 1973, after visiting the Polk State School and Hospital. And I just want to read an excerpt that I think really powerfully speaks to the position that the ACC Park was in after having made some really troubling observations regarding the state of living of those with intellectual disabilities that were living at Polk at the time. So it says, we asked the executive committee and the board of directors, like everyone else, will ACC Park allow these ugly and inhumane conditions to continue? Does ACC Park visit these schools and hospitals to cleanse our psyches of guilt by writing nice reports? Or do we visit because we are fully committed to act on behalf of each child and adult? Do we, ACC Park, want to walk away now, or do we want to take on an almost impossible task? With all these questions, we can make one certain statement. It is time for a decision. And so what they decided to do was, again, engage in serious conversation, the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare and also members of the local media, to spread the word about the conditions that they were witnessing, having faith that once members of the general population in Western Pennsylvania and beyond, and also the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare, once they were made aware of the situation, that action would be taken. And as we can see, based on a newspaper article that was published, was included in the collection, there was action that was taken. So hundreds of people who were living at Polk State School and Hospital at the time were moved to other care facilities, and also the director of the center at the school and hospital was fired. And most poignantly, and this is something that was a reflection of one of the members of the visitation teams, as you can see prominently featured on this newspaper article, is the fact that not only were these changes made, but there was also a dedication on the part of the Secretary of the Department of Public Welfare to make sure to be dedicated to retraining and kind of reconceptualizing how it is that those with disabilities that were living at Polk, were engaged with and cared for, and And this, and this change was, much to the benefit of those residents living there. And furthermore, ACC Park really continued to support and advocate for the closure and also the decrease of populations of people with disabilities living at these state-run care facilities, and really supported community living movements, and were really incredible advocates on the ground, affecting positive change for the welfare of people with disabilities. And so, as you can see from the past two slides particularly, there's incredible source material within this collection that speaks to the actions, really the change agents that this grassroots organizations comprise of parent advocates made in order to really, advocate for the social welfare of people with disabilities. So in addition to the reports, as well as newspaper clippings, there's also correspondence and meeting minutes and case files, and overwhelmingly a significant amount of evidence that was aggregated that was further troublingly reflective of the way of life of people who were living at these state-run care facilities in the 1960s and 1970s. And so again, when you think about a topic like disability history, I think that there's a real great benefit in taking a step back from the topic itself and thinking about who the players are that were on the ground and affecting change. Who were those change agents? We talk a lot. I talk a lot with our education department about the work that they try to undertake to introduce and to help students become more familiar with how it is that a group of people can really affect positive change in society. And this is an incredible collection that is reflective of the steps that a group of incredibly dedicated and passionate everyday people made that greatly benefited the welfare and lives of people with disabilities in our region. And again, regarding perspectives particularly, this collection also has a number of letters that were actually written to the director of the secretary of public welfare at the time. And these are letters that were written actually and inspired to they were reacting negatively to Helen Woolgamoo's decision to fire the director of the Polk Center at the time. And so multiple perspectives, again, I think a powerful opportunity to have students engage with historical empathy and taking a step outside of themselves and thinking about what inspired the actions or what impacted the actions of the various players who are on the ground, both the grassroots organization as well as the secretary of the Department of Public Welfare, and then those people who were inspired to write letters of protest, who clearly had a different perspective on care at the time, and perhaps were motivated by other observations to advocate for the former director. So that is the collection that
This actually reminds me a little bit of the current National History Day theme is taking a stand. And so the idea of a group of impassioned local, parents taking a stand on behalf of their children, but then also the idea that this is something that's well documented, it's included within your archives, and now is also something that, they're kind of saying, never again is this going to happen. It's also a model for other communities to see, how to affect change. So it's really interesting to me to think about this, not only in the community sense, but also kind of in a national scale sense as well.
Oh, absolutely. And what's incredible about this collection, should any particular National History Day student be interested in delving into this incredible story, is that actually our local United Way, as well as Achieva here in our county, joined with us here at the History Center and digitized and put up online over 800 primary sources from this collection. And so it is on an Omeka site, but it is kind of an online repository that is linked to both within I believe the descriptions tab of this Google chat, and then also within my Learning Lab collection as well. So it's something that, for those teachers who are interested in exploring the subject matter of disability history with their students, it's an incredible narrative. I had the pleasure to process this collection, and it was among the most impactful and powerful collections that I've worked with thus far. And I am so thankful that that the United Way and Archival were able to join with us and really work to make these primary source materials available online and freely searchable as well. So, yeah. So from the ACC Park, we will now look a little bit into the history of disaster response as well as natural disasters. And we're going to look at that through the lens of our collection of Pittsburgh Police Historical Association materials. So our primary subject matter within disaster response is, perhaps for those locals who are here, the Great Flood of 1936 is one that lives in infamy. It was around St. Patrick's Day in that year, 1936, and there are a number of source materials that we have within the library and archives that reflect this incredible natural disaster that really adversely impacted thousands of Pittsburghers around this time period in the 1930s. What I'll be highlighting today, as you can see to the right, is actually a single log book that is within this Pittsburgh Police collection, and that of a single station. But before, I just want to take a couple of moments to highlight just real quickly. I mean, there's incredible information about the flood, detailed information about the flood, but in order to contextualize, I just wanted to make sure to say that, the flood primarily was caused by the fact that there was quite a bit of snow and ice built up at this point in March in 1936. And then during or on March 17th and 18th, there were unusually high temperatures for the season at the time. And so that meant a lot of this snow and ice melted, and it caused a horrendous flood in the city, and in fact, the biggest flood in our city's history. So as you can see on the slide, the high water mark was 46 feet, which is just it's a feat of imagination to try to really conceptualize of our downtown area, particularly experiencing that much of a flood of water. And as you can imagine, and perhaps even as we've witnessed natural disasters occur in our country and in our world over this past decade and beyond, the city was really dealing with a lot of challenges even after the water had receded the 2 days following the initial flooding. So there were power outages. There was, of course, contamination of the water because the infrastructure was literally flooded. And then also, as a result, there were some serious public health risks. And sadly, we know of many Pittsburghers who were injured and many as well who were killed as a result of this flood. And, particularly as far as public health risks are concerned, you see that the Red Cross particularly is concerned about typhoid, the outbreak of typhoid with contaminated and unfiltered water. But we do have the National Guard, like these government agencies coming in, and the Works Progress Administration as well, because of the flood, pouring in to provide aid to the city and really to try to get it back in running order. And before I move to the collection itself, I just want to take a moment and thank one of my colleagues, Lauren Uhl, who really helped me as far as becoming familiar with the most important bullet points of the Pittsburgh flood in 36. There's a lot of incredible information out there, and I consider her to be very well respected and authoritative voice as far as those numbers that are true, that I can report as a part of contextualizing this collection. So thank you, Lauren. So as you can imagine, and perhaps as some of you have even seen, a lot of the sources that kind of bubble to the surface first when people are interested in delving into the history of the 1936 flood are, of course, photographs and also newspaper reports that date to the time as well. So it's an incredible photo of a group of police officers who helped and were on the ground and assisted those that were in under their jurisdiction during the flood. But really what I thought would be really interesting and thought-provoking to dive into, and what I came across while processing this collection was a logbook that was kept by a local Pittsburgh police station. And this particular station was in the West End part of the city. And interestingly, this daily logbook, from what I can tell, is really an opportunity for the officers to document and kind of make sure the lines of communications are open from one shift to another. And so you see, and you can kind of make out from the slide itself that, the actual date of the entry is documented. And then often it's information relating to either people who are in need within their jurisdiction, or those organizations or individuals or businesses who are offering aid, or communications that are coming in from the local government or the state government regarding some recommendations for folks who are dealing with the aftermath of the flood. And so it's an incredible day-to-day glimpse into how one police station dealt with and met the needs of residents, and also the needs of the infrastructure and physical structures within the area generally. So because of the police, it seems like really the police station was this intermediary between those people that were in need within this particular area, and then those organizations and individuals and physicians that were offering aid. It's a really interesting, this logbook is a great vessel of voices, and really by extension, perspectives and contributions at this particular time point within the flood and then the direct aftermath. And so what we see are the voices of local physicians and nurses stepping forward and volunteering both their office their doctor's office locations, and also in some instances even their personal addresses, stepping forward and making sure that the station knows that if any individuals come to them in need, to just no questions asked, send them to their office and they will provide that assistance. We see as well that the station itself is turned into a kind of a temporary hospital where folks can receive and become inoculated against typhoid. And you also see a number of messages that come in from the city and the state that the police are in charge of really distributing to the people within their jurisdiction. And there are also so many incredible examples of individual people and charitable organizations who step forward and donate food or water, milk, blankets, furniture, really any kind of goods and services that people can provide to those that are in need, they do. And I could present so many examples from these pages within this logbook that I found to be really poignant. But a couple particularly that stuck out to me was that one gentleman came forward and said that he would happily repair anybody's hot water heater, and particularly he would like to extend the services to those impoverished families within the area that were in need of, that their water heaters were in need of repair, and that he would do so free of charge, no questions asked. And then there's an additional note underneath just stating that, essentially vouching for, his excellent skills, saying that he actually was the one who fixed the police station's water heater in the aftermath of the flood. And so just a really, considerate, courageous individual who really recognized the need within the community and stepped forward to serve. And we have to remember too that, this was in mid-March of 1936. So, it's not as if the flood happened in July or in August. And so, there certainly, I'm sure, were cold days to come. And with so many families having experienced so much damage to their home, the fact that so many people within the region and then beyond stepped forward to serve, it's an incredible testament to that. And then one other anecdote that I found within these logbooks that I found fascinating as well is that the Humane Society actually came around and reported to the police station that they would be happy to respond to any call on any report of any sick animals, both those that didn't seem to have homes or those that were formerly in homes that had been flooded. They would be happy to pick them up, take care of them, and then return them safely to their homes after the damages of the flood had receded. So truly a really, really interesting glimpse into individual people and their particular contributions, and also the role of the Pittsburgh police or a police force generally when a natural disaster strikes an area. And one final point I want to make too is that, it being a police logbook, you also get a really poignant but really poignant glimpse into the desperation of some people given the circumstances of the flood. So there are within this daily logbook reports of people who were raiding a public dump area to try to reuse carpet that had been wet, and the police really took efforts to discourage that kind of activity in light of the health risks that a wet carpet could present, the public health risks. In addition to that, then there are those entries or references to someone who had stolen clothing from the Red Cross, and then someone who had attempted to burglarize a car. And so many different perspectives and vantage points into how a singular community dealt with the aftermath of the flood. But very much so, there are just numerous individual people and charitable organizations who are listed within these entries as really offering generous aid to those in need. And it's incredible the detail with which the police force documented the kinds of materials that were being donated to the station and then distributed to those that are in need. So before we move on to
mentions too, the logbook is something that we wouldn't have thought of as such a rich resource, but it sounds like this is one of those things that you could skip over and miss all of these great details. And so sometimes taking a second to step back and really examine each document thoroughly. There's a lot of stories that came from this one. So.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And as an archivist, when I'm working with a collection like this, I try to leave a trail of breadcrumbs. And so, within the box that contains that logbook, I don't expect people, to think about like, well, I want all material, or I want to look for all police materials relating to the date 1936. And then within that, maybe something will relate to the flood. So within my description for the box that contains this logbook, I make a specific reference to the fact that that it provides an insight into how a station reacted to the Pittsburgh flood and really dealt with the challenges that arose on a daily basis. So, but I understand, and and logbooks particularly, again, I love that we're dealing with archival documents, but they often aren't the ones that kind of jump off the page. I mean, if you would see it exhibited in a case, it wouldn't necessarily draw your attention like an evocative artifact or a powerful image would. But again, I want to kind of reiterate that point earlier that I made in the presentation, that often these are, revelatory vessels of people's voices and also, reflections of their actions in a way that's difficult to duplicate in other kinds of primary sources. And so I did want to, of course, include a couple of images that I find to be really powerful and poignant that I think, again, they certainly have their place to further contextualize and accompany something like the police logbook. So this is a great photo, again, within that same collection of the Pittsburgh Police Historical Association, of individual officers who served during the flood in Pittsburgh. And I can't unfortunately say authoritatively if any of these folks were at the station that the logbook relates to. But what I do think is incredible about the captioning is the fact that it's clear that these men stepped forward and helped fellow officers in Louisville, Kentucky, who experienced the Ohio River Valley flood in 1937, under a year later. So. That's an incredible photo. And then the next photo is just kind of give you a sense of the challenges that individual people and also, of course, the local police force were facing in the aftermath of the flood. So this is a photograph that was taken of flooded homes in McKees Rocks, and that's an area that's near where the police station was located. And then we do have one more resource for you. Again, these have been uploaded to the Learning Lab. So this is an incredible this is incredible film footage that was donated to us actually fairly recently in 2015 by an optometrist, or rather the film itself was shot by an optometrist, Dr. H. Ward Ewalt, and he somehow, we're actually not quite sure what kind of connections he had. I was talking about this with a colleague yesterday, to be able to to shoot moving image footage of the flood. So you can see he starts here with the newspaper, and then he has this great visualization of the extent of the flood in downtown Pittsburgh. And then from there, cuts to incredible moving image footage of the point. So it really powerfully gives you a sense of the extent of the damage of the 1936 flood. And then, you know, I think it's even more powerful than some of the incredible photographs that I've seen of it as well, because you kind of see it in, you know, at live time. And of course, he's noting here the 46-foot high water mark, and you see, you know, the high water mark in relation to residential homes, and of course, Liberty Avenue here in the downtown area. Again, you could see how high the water has climbed, and then, you know, how some folks are trapped, and how vehicles are certainly in situations not to be operational during the flood. And then again, other shots of the downtown area. So, you know, I think, again, I believe that a film like this is just so incredibly powerful, especially accompanied with, you know, a document or a collection of documents like the logbook that really give you a sense of who these people are. You know, maybe not necessarily the gentlemen here that are rowing in the canoe, but everyday people, you know, who were working with different organizations or acting as individuals to either, you know, persist and survive in difficult times, or to recognize that they're themselves be fortunate in having not been affected, and they want to do something to help. So, so for the sake of time, I'd like to move on to the last collection that I have highlighted for you, and that is that of the Femme Soul Trader records. And so the Femme Soul Trader collection came to us in the early 2000s, and it relates to a piece of legislation that actually originated in England, but then also came into effect here in the United States, and then was amended a little bit later in the mid-1850s, as you can see on the slide. But initially, the status of Femme Soul Trader was established for the wives of sailors, and particularly in circumstances where their husbands were out to sea. And so it gave them certain rights, so property rights, and also the right to be sued if their husbands were at sea at the time that you know, these particular rights would have been called upon their husbands. And so again, for the purposes of the collection that we'll be talking about today, and particularly the one case of one individual person, Caroline Mann's Hannon, the act was actually amended in 1855 in the Pennsylvania legislature, and it extended rights similar to that of a femme sole trader if that woman could prove that her husband neglected her, or also, you know, exercised some profligacy or drunkenness, or from other cause really didn't support she and her family, she could go before the local county court and petition to become or to achieve the femme sole trader status. And what I think is interesting and important to kind of make as a point of emphasis here is the fact that these were not rights that were extended to all women at this point in the 19th century. It was something that the woman had to experience circumstances in which she felt compelled to go before the county courts. And then furthermore, she had to have two people testify to the veracity of her petition, of her testimony, and then the courts would rule whether or not she had cause to receive the femme sole trader status. And once she would achieve that status, she would receive exclusive rights over her property holdings. She'd also achieve financial independence. And so if there were debts brought before her husband, money could not be taken from her to settle those debts. And she also can have sole custody of her children. And then there's also a clause, provided she provide a good example for them. And so it's a really interesting glimpse into local women's history, but this certainly, Pennsylvania was not the only state, and Allegheny County was not the only county that extended this status to women. So it's a really interesting early glimpse into the women's rights movement, especially through the lens of the passage of legislation. And so the collection itself, so you can see the cover, which is just fabulous. The collection itself consists of 4 volumes of transcripts of written petitions of these individual women who came before the Allegheny County Court to try to achieve the femme sole trader status. And so the person that we are going to follow, the person whose testimony we're going to follow throughout this case, is that of Caroline Manns Hannon. So just to give you a little background on her, Caroline was married to Frederick Manns, and the two of them together, based on her petition, we know, ran a tobacco and cigar shop. Now, Frederick sadly passes away in early 1864, and at that time, Caroline has 4 children, the oldest of which is around 11 years old. And so her husband, while her husband passes away, he leaves to her as a part of kind of the administration of his will, the business, the tobacco and cigar shop, in order to support his children. And so a few months later, Caroline, of course, in the meantime, Caroline continues to oversee and act as the owner of the cigar and tobacco shop. But she remarries in June of 1864 to a gentleman by the name of Jeremiah Hannon. And together, sadly, kind of a year after they are married, she finds herself in circumstances to become a femme sole, or to try to petition for the femme sole trader status. And so she testifies that her husband sadly is in a state of persistent drunkenness, that he contributes nothing to the business, and in fact many times kind of comes into the tobacco and cigar shop and drives out customers. And so she's able to testify, or she's able to have 2 folks testify, both her father as well as one of the cigar makers. They come in and testify on her behalf, and she is able to arise at the femme sole trader status. And so this petition itself is a really powerful glimpse into Caroline's personal experience as well as her voice generally, because otherwise it really probably won't find a perspective like hers represented in archival collections that date back to that period. And so you can see in 1865, she's listed as a tobacconist within the city directories. And then also, you can use an accompanying piece like a map to be able to physically locate her store, which, as we see, is on 158 Smithfield Street. So this is a map from our historic Pittsburgh maps collection. And then I did some more searching on Caroline Manns and found her within the newspaper archives. So we can see we found her obituary. And as you can see, it leads out wealthy businesswoman passes away. And so we know that, she fought really hard to maintain authority over her shop, which she actually renames the C. Mann's, for Caroline, Mann's Tobacco Establishment. And you can if you read in the obituary, you see that her children tried to convince her to kind of settle in a more residential area in the city rather than in the heart of Smithfield Street. And she refused to leave. She said that she'd been there since 1848. And really, given her petition to become a femme sole trader, we perhaps understand, understand through this obituary and also through the petition that she fought really hard to maintain authority over her business, and it makes sense perhaps that she would want to stay entrenched in it for as long as she could. And she passes away in 1908. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is kind of quickly go through again. I understand that, it seems like to an extent that perhaps these collections kind of emerge from a void. And so I try to think through kind of providing you all with a framework to how to seek out and find these voices and these perspectives within a huge bank of primary source materials, like the Learning Lab, and also like other repositories generally. So first and foremost, and a lot of these are intuitive, but I think it's helpful to kind of get like this kind of framework and mindset kind of down as a step-by-step process. So I think it's important to first identify the theme and topic, of course, that you're interested in having your students explore. And I wanted to make as a point of emphasis the notion of making the context the key, really being thoughtful about consulting your secondary sources. And I think within your secondary sources, you can find and start identifying those main players. So these individuals, the businesses, the organizations who are on the ground really experiencing that moment in time, and whose lived experiences are reflective of the topic that you'd like to explore. So also, while you're identifying the theme and topic, I find it really helpful to, if there is a date range and if there are geographic boundaries to your theme and topic, to really keep that in mind as well, and that'll help you cut through primary sources as well. So as that second point, again, just reiterate to make sure to think about the people who are associated with the themes and the topics that are of interest to you, and really acknowledge the limitations of your list as you're creating it, because inherently they're going to be based on what you know about the topics and also what the secondary sources reveal. And so there may be other collections that live within the Learning Lab and that live within other archives that haven't been featured within the secondary sources that you're consulting, but that doesn't mean that they aren't perhaps really well suited for your students. And then, I think as you're identifying these main players, then it naturally feeds into really compiling a thoughtful list of keywords and proper names to deploy. And so for this, then, we're going to take a glimpse at a catalog record that I just grabbed quickly from WorldCat. And the second bullet point, or the first bullet point that I've placed in bold there, is really to stand on the shoulders of librarians. And so when we look at this catalog record, what we'll see is the fact that there are a number of subject terms that are associated with any given publication. So if you're searching for your theme and topic, please feel free to use the terms that you find intuitive within the search box. And then once you find secondary source material that is valuable to you, not only comb it for its content, but also take a look and see what subject terms that the librarians that have cataloged the book have associated with. Because there's this standard language that librarians and archivists use to describe books and also archival materials. And so it's helpful to kind of be conversational in that language as you're searching for different sources that relate to the topic that's of interest to you. Additionally, beyond that, we also want to just take the time to listen to the voices that you've aggregated and really kind of reflect on the factors that are impacting your assessment, from one point to another. And think about, of course, whose and which voices will speak to your students, and which ones will resonate with them, inform them, and challenge them. And then also, of course, keep in mind, the formats that you think you will be most compelling and most reflective of those voices. And I make this a very strong point of emphasis. Make sure to consult with your archivists and librarians. It's our honor and our pleasure to advocate for our collections. And because we have our noses in them often, we can kind of bring to light other collections that, perhaps aren't rising to the surface for various reasons. So.
We have a few comments actually from the audience as well. And so moving back to the St. Patrick's Day flood, someone mentions that the footage is just really amazing and gives you this idea of the flood's extent. And so that paired with some of those documents kind of puts you in the shoes of the people that were living there at that time. And so, really appreciated that resource. And then someone else mentioned that it would be interesting to actually compare the different ways that women framed their petitions to the state. So you mentioned one specifically, but even just thinking through other stories and then being able to compare those petitions.
Absolutely. That's such a great point.
Last piece too that I wanted to mention, and one that I think you've just hit on just so perfectly, is the use of key subject terms and the importance of searching the Learning Lab kind of as an archivist, putting yourself in the archivist's shoes. How would they describe those resources that you're looking for? And I love too how you say kind of acknowledge the limitations of your initial search and keep revising over time. I think that's incredibly important.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's actually such a perfect segue into, what we have remaining for you in this presentation, which of course, we want to kind of switch our focus and make sure to think about hopefully some guidelines and some recommendations I hope will help give some, structure to some searching within the Learning Lab and also within the Smithsonian Collections Search Center as well. So what I have here is just a quick, super quick search of women within the Collections Search Center. As you can see, there are over 17,000 results. So it's quite a huge cache of primary sources within the Collections Search Center. And then I did the search of women and labor, kind of using Caroline's story as a jumping off point to find related primary source materials within the Learning Lab. And you can see if I combine women and labor and having and in all caps, we have 489 resources. And so, as an archivist, I would enjoy going through those 489 resources, but I understand there are always limitations on time, and you really, want to be able to have an efficient way to cut through, these primary sources that kind of have come to the surface. And so, in poking around on the Collection Search Center, I have a series of screenshots here that I hope will help you as far as navigating all these primary sources. So, and Ashley, please correct
me who don't know. Sorry, with the Collection Search Center's URL it's just simply collections plural .si as in Smithsonian Institution .edu, and that's the Collection Search Center, and it's actually powered by the same database of resources and records that the Smithsonian Learning Lab is, but provides a different set of refinements as far as how you can modify your search results.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to say, before I highlight some of the faceted searching, and so the faceted searching meaning, like if you look at the left side of the screenshot, you see the narrow by, and then there's online media type topic. I do want to say kind of a buyer beware, like, it's something that you see, like you can refine by date, or you could, refine by topic or name. And there are great strengths to being able to do this, but you also want to keep in mind that that all archives and museums and libraries that put their collections online grapple with the fact that this is not, fail-safe. Sometimes in doing so, you eliminate materials that are pertinent to what you're interested in, or in so doing, you don't automatically get down to exactly what you're interested in. And so, it's kind of a bit of a treasure hunt, even though there is this, really great navigation opportunities to be able to kind of, further hone in on what collection or what materials relate to your interests. But having said that, I do want to highlight a couple that I think are helpful, and also particularly within the light of like brainstorming and inspiring, different ways to engage with different primary sources. And so the first is topic. So I have like a little arrow to that. And if we go on to the next slide, you could see, so you can actually expand and take a look at all of the additional subject terms or keywords that are topical that relate to the primary sources that have come back in the results of women and labor. And so what I thought would be, really helpful and stimulating as far as the thinking is to browse. So it actually, the way that it presents these topics to you, or it presents the most common ones first, so you can see, for example, there are 379 of the over 1,300 documents that also have history associated with women and labor. So you can see these different topics that relate to the results. And again, I think that'll really stimulate thinking and inspire some avenues of exploration that, perhaps you hadn't necessarily thought of when delving into this cache of primary source material. So topic is one that I think find very helpful. And then if you have a specific additional topic in mind, but you're not sure of the authoritative keyword that librarians and archivists use, you can also do the sort alphabetically and quickly assess, the letter that you're looking for, and get a sense of whether or not the word you're thinking of is the keyword that librarians and archivists use in that standard language. So there's that, and then also name. And I think name is particularly pertinent to like the main push that I've been trying to make throughout this presentation. So, in the case of, Caroline Mann's-Hannon, and then in the case of the Pittsburgh Police Force, and then the case of, the local grassroots organization, ACC Park, it's not feasible for you all who are diving into these topics to know these people at the outset. And so using the name function and being able to peruse different individual people and also organizations that again relate to these two topics that might interest you, women and labor, then you can take a look and see, well, what primary sources relate to the United States Exploring Expedition and women and labor? Or, are there additional materials that relate to women in labor and tobacco, similar to Caroline's story? So, you can use, I guess that would be more of like a topical oriented example, but you can use, I think it's helpful to kind of navigate through and browse the topic and the name. And then, if you do find primary sources within the Search Center, the Smithsonian Collection Search Center, then you can find them within the Learning Lab and add them to your collections. So. that's just, a vantage point from which to navigate and I would say embrace the power of browsing as well. So we'll culminate with just taking a look at also finding archival voices and perspective in another online resource called Archive Grid. So here you're not going to find digitized primary sources like you do in the Learning Lab, but what you'll find are the equivalent of like catalog records. So just descriptions of various archival collections. So you could just do a quick search of Archive Grid to find it, and it searches across archival collections all over the country, which is pretty incredible. I did a search for materials that relate to the Pittsburgh flood in 1936. So what I did here is you could see in the search box is put in parentheses flood and 1936. So I'm getting results for collections that have both of those, both that date and that term in it. And then also with the location Pittsburgh, I want to what it'll do then is it will return collections that are at repositories in Pittsburgh, which will be handy for those teachers who are looking to do research within repositories locally. So if we can advance to the next slide, and you can see some of the results here. So again, when we think about different people on the ground and their perspectives on something like a natural disaster, a flood, we have a number of different perspectives represented here. So we have a group of scientists who were, analyzing flood damage over time within the collection that's at the Carnegie Mellon University Archives. You have this hydraulic research library. Within the photographs collection, we have individual people who felt compelled to document the flood with photography. And then at the bottom there is actually the film that we took some time to take a clip of as well. And again, as you can notice, so between Carnegie Mellon University Archives, us here at the History Center, and then the University of Pittsburgh, all of these collections reside at repositories in the city of Pittsburgh. So it's a great, great resource, especially to seek out and find voices that perhaps aren't readily available online, but still might be really engaging to your students. So that is, and then one final note about Archive Grid is when you search, the de facto way that they display the results is within the list view. But if you choose the summary view, you can kind of see the people and the groups and the topics that are associated with the results that you're receiving. And so that's another way to kind of try to find collections that are related to, what your research interests are, and provide you avenues to different collections that perhaps you hadn't thought of previously. And then I did want to make sure to let you know that there is like a link to where you can find how to get to that particular repository or contact them regarding the collection that interests you. And then along the side here, they almost have like an Amazon-esque component where you can see other collections that might pique your interest as well. So, okay. And then last but not least, and we can conclude with these two slides here. So I worked with Kate Harris here, and I was really appreciative of her assistance. She took a look for similarly kind of lesser known ground level collections of primary sources within the Learning Lab that relate to and kind of explore similar themes. And so there are three that are here, and then within the next slide there are two additional as well. And again, we have links to those within the description field of this Google chat that'll live on YouTube. And of course, I wanted to make reference to the fact that the Learning Lab collection that I created, containing many of the primary sources that I highlighted today, are also on the Learning Lab as well. So I think Kate did an excellent job of first creating these and then sharing them as again, other stories that perhaps don't necessarily rise to the surface when you're thinking of bigger themes and topics in history, but to present a really interesting vantage point from which students can engage with historical empathy and really step outside themselves and consider a large theme in history from a distinctly different vantage point, but one that's hopefully relatable. So thank you all so much, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you all have. And I did want to highlight, there's some great resources, and anyone who's interested in coming to visit the Library and Archives of the History Center, we're open every Wednesday through Saturday from 10 to 5. And we offer free admissions to anyone who is interested in researching within our collections. And please do feel free to reach out to us and to me. We're all happy to be of help and provide access to our collections.
Well, thank you so much, Sierra. I've really appreciated it. This session will actually be archived both on YouTube with the links in the description, as well as in the Learning Lab. So you can take a look at the archive session, share it with a friend. You can also kind of sneak to Just the Flood if you want to see that, or move to some of the Learning Lab collections to find out more information and the keywords that we use to describe them as well. I want to thank you, Sierra. I want to thank our participants as well. This was a great session, and I'm looking forward to digging in with archival documents. I think being able to use these documents to tell personal stories is really quite moving as far as the ways that we look at these documents and the ways that we perceive them. So I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much, and we look forward to seeing you in Pittsburgh. Have a good one.
Thank you.